female curatorial collective based in St. Petersburg, initially and co-founded by Anna Bitkin and Marie Waits in 2010. So when we founded our collective, it's intended to be a platform for interdisciplinary research-based project in the field of contemporary art, architecture, and design. And throughout our practice, we challenge the border of the territory of art, and we also seek how it can foster social change. Most of our projects are collective, multi-layered, and very long-term initiatives aimed at generating new knowledge about the cause and consequences of changing political and social realities, and often consequences of capitalism globally and also in the region, in Russia and post-Soviet Union territory. So our project also lie between historical analysis and political imaginary. So we also, within our project, deal with current issues that are widely discussed, both in the region where we're from, in Russia, and also internationally. We are interested in question of gender, in question of migration, changing political and environmental conditions, climate change. We're interested in public space and citizenship, development of education, and collective history, collective memory, and also growing role of media in the global society, and many others. So we express and form our curatorial statement, usually outside of white cubes, so working within different social platform and different social and political context is very important for us. Therefore, we work often in public spaces, in educational and public institutions, and also within online domain, as we're doing now within this project Get Real, this online discussion about housing and real estate. Which is taking place as a part of our ongoing project Critical Mass. So Masha, maybe you can say a few words about Critical Mass as a general project.
So Critical Mass is one of the longest top projects. It exists as long as our collective, basically for the past 10 years already. And the idea behind this multidisciplinary research-based project is to look very widely at public space and public sphere. The project is breaking into seasons, and each season has a specific theme. So when we were just starting, we were solely focusing on public space and its more narrow understanding, sort of. So we worked a lot with open public spaces, with parks and squares, and we were like thinking big, and the projects were mostly like this big installations in the public space, which was also quite new at the time in Russia. And then we started to work more with communities, with more specific contexts, with more narrow contexts, and not so obvious ones as well. And we were kind of digging deep into specific social structures that also play an important and crucial role in making public space. So the idea is to understand how public space is changing, what is the Soviet public space is like, what Soviet kind of legacy it holds, and what new elements it develops, what is the role of citizens in forming and shaping public spaces, and what interests intersect in public spaces. And by public spaces, we also mean and imagine different social structures, such as educational structures or structures that are aimed at urban planning. So complex analysis is something that lies in the core of the project. So previous editions were about, for instance, potential of dormant districts, or how do we deal with social and collective memory, and how it gets integrated into architectural projects and in kind of creating of urban landscapes. how ideology is integrated through architecture or some social structures. And this season, I think, is very timely, actually, because we talk a lot about housing. We talk a lot about housing question, how to pose housing question, how to try to answer it from different perspectives. And we, again, use a wide spectrum of lenses when we look at it, because we try to kind of take housing question out of its disciplinary isolation and not look at it from only architectural perspective or social or political perspective, but also add racial and class and gender perspectives, and see how housing policies have changed over time, how housing policies are developing in different societies, in socialist societies, capitalist societies, what is housing question in neoliberal context. And I think the online series is also our response to two issues. First of all, of course, it's our way to cope with the pandemic and the way how we are all, kind of trapped and paralyzed in our abilities to work outside our homes, because the exhibition that was supposed to be the final project of the season had to be postponed. So in order not to lose the grip and stay tuned, we decided that we're going to conduct a series of online discussions that will be kind of expanding the discursive field and ground of the season. And second of all, I think the series of discussion is also kind of our answer to housing, not answer, but an attempt to raise a variety of themes that emerge with the pandemic and that are related to housing, because home and the idea of home has been rethought and is being reconfigured now that we all are stuck at home, and we see how, for instance, domestic violence has just skyrocketed and these numbers are becoming huge. We see that our homes are turning into office, this multifunctional spaces, what to do with that. We also see on the one hand that people still trying to invest into real estate, and this is surprising. But on the other hand, real estate is something that still remains real, something that people see as a tangible investment rather than Bitcoin, for instance. So how do we address housing? How do we dig into different themes that are related to the housing questions is something that we're discussing as a part of the series. And we have a brilliant team of speakers. So they all come from different fields, architects, sociologists, artists, filmmakers, from different geographies, because we also want to address very peculiar cases that also are geography and climate and economy related. So this is our third talk. Two previous talks were focusing on cases in Moscow. We were talking about the program of renovation and kind of housing activism. And then we moved to Sudan, where we talked about creating new women's rights and how participation of women in public spaces changes the urban landscape. And now we are moving to London. So Anya, could you please introduce Wilf and the theme of his talk tonight?
Yeah, I'm really happy that Wilf could join us today, and really, I'm really excited about his research and his presentation, which I've learned in our casual meeting in Arnhem in the Netherlands, where Wilf conducted his master program in the Dutch Art Institute, and his research became his thesis for graduation of this institution, which I also graduated from 2 years earlier. And Wilf is a visual artist and filmmaker. He is born and raised and based in London, and geography of his research and his presentation is very much related to the region he's from, so he knows it well. And their work emerges from a research and writing practices that reflect on future imaginaries and their representations. So lately, Wilf, in his work, he primarily focuses on the ideological and aesthetic dogmas that shape the spatial politics of late capitalism and the Anthropocene. And we're really happy to welcome Wilf with his presentation, which is titled as Dream Homes, the Speculative Aesthetics of Luxury Real Estate Marketing. And Wilf, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Maybe I should also just quickly start by saying that despite this introduction, the presentation I'll be giving today is not so London specific. And actually I'll be focusing on the sort of second half of my thesis, which if anywhere is set in more of a virtual space. So this is maybe a fitting way of presenting it. So yes. The talk, as I say, will focus on the final two chapters, which I've had to condense a lot for the sake of time here, but hopefully I've condensed it enough to fit the time, but that it still makes some sense. But there is also the chance to ask any questions or clarifications at the end. So yeah, I will now begin. First, need to Today I'm going to be talking about the marketing of luxury real estate, in particular the visualization of prospective real estate. In the last decade or so, we have seen a whole new form of architectural visualization, namely CGI animated video, as you can sort of see here. The prominence of these videos is directly linked to changes in the market. Increasingly, property is sold off-plan. So off-plan means it's sold before construction is completed, or in fact, often before construction has even begun. An apartment might be sold or flipped several times before completion. For example, by the time of the breaking of ground ceremony for the redevelopment of Battersea Power Station here in London, 97% of the phase 1 apartments had already been sold. Let me show image here of Battersea Power Station redevelopment. The increasing importance of off-plan property sales has led to a greater importance in visualizing architecture, and consequently greater investment by property developers in creating such images. These videos are becoming increasingly realistic with ever greater production values. It's actually often hard to distinguish between what is like an animated image or a computer generated image and a video image of these property. In the past 5 years, we have seen a real explosion of these videos circulating online. This is linked to a shift in the production process of these videos, away from the time-consuming and costly workflow of 3D computer animation towards the use of game engines. The game engines are a software environment that you use to create video games. Unlike 3D animation, they are rendered in real time. They can be navigated and interacted with in real time. For example, so in this sort of footage that you're seeing here, sorry, where was I? So yeah, so they can be interacted with in real time. To put that in perspective, when Toy Story, for example, was made in 1995, a single frame could take anywhere between 45 minutes to 30 hours to render, depending on how complex it was. In order to create the illusion of continual movement, you need between 12 and 30 frames a second. Video games render at a 30th of a second. In this way, the virtual space of a game engine can be used much like a traditional film set or film location. Once the architecture has been virtually constructed, an interior designer can dress the set. It can then be lit, and then you can bring in your virtual camera. The engine will even simulate the optics of specific lenses. So for example, you can specify the focal length depending if you want a wide angle or a telephoto lens. You can adjust the aperture to affect the depth of field of the shot. And there are other like optical phenomena programmed into the software in order to simulate things like vignetting or lens flares. So the cinematic apparatus is sort of simulated within the game engine, but the videos themselves also ape a sort of cinematic language. We see the use of slow motion and stop motion. So you see something like this, where it's kind of simulating the appearance of a kind of stop motion time-lapse photography. So this language is that the language that the video attempts to emulate is a cinematic language. There is something obviously quite ironic about these. In order to look more real, these images must create the impression that they're in fact mediated. But there is, of course, a logic to this. Cinema's own claim to realism is premised on the material relation of the cinematic apparatus. Cinema's own claim to realism is premised on the material relation of the cinematic apparatus to the world it captures, the photochemical process of film, the optics of the lens, or the mechanics of the camera. It is exactly this materiality that cinema stakes its claim to realism, its indexicality. Despite decades of media theory telling us otherwise, the idea that the camera never lies still rings true to most people. Of course, in the hyper-controlled and simulated environment of CGI, there is no indexical relation. It is an absolute construction. As the late Harun Farokhi says in his final film, Parallel, in cinema, there is the wind that blows and the wind blown by a wind machine. With computer images, there is only one kind of wind. And he dubs this a new constructivism. I want to unpack that idea a bit further, but first I would take a short detour via film history. Farokhi here is making quite a specific reference to film history and to an almost sort of mythological quote, allegedly from D.W. Griffith, that cinema is the wind in the trees. This romantic idea of cinema's ability to capture the unplannable, unconstructed, autonomous nature of reality. It's also an often told anecdote of film history that early cinema goers were more fascinated by background incidentals such as the wind in the trees or the swirling of dust than by the staging of the actors in the foreground. So here, this is a footage from the Lumiere brothers from the late 1800s. You might add to that list forms such as fire, smoke, water, or snow. Such forms seem to defy objecthood. They are boundless, ever-changing and ephemeral, hovering somewhere between animate and inanimate, material and immaterial. In fact, Kant writes about such forms in his Critique of Judgment, describing them as beautiful views. However, their very formlessness and their inherent resistance to fixity conflicts with Kant's aesthetic system. For Kant, such forms are not objects and can therefore not be judged aesthetically. The fascination for such forms certainly predates cinema. However, cinematographic recording transforms such contingent motion forms into spatio-temporally framed objects, rendering them potentially repeatable moments of past time. CGI has developed its own method for simulating such forms, or what are known in the industry as fuzzy objects. The method is called a particle system, and it was developed by LucasArts animators during the production of Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan from 1982. It was used in an animated sequence demonstrating the Genesis project, which have a clip from the film here. So particle systems use the generation and dissipation of points or particles in a complex system of movements The system has attached to it a set of particle behavioral parameters, which determine possible movements, dissipations, lifetimes, velocities, sizes, etc. Each of these attributes can be specified by a parametric equation. It is common that all or most of these parameters are not given a precise numeric value, but instead are stochastically defined. In other words, they are set to like a central value and then given a degree of randomness allowable on either side. The resulting system of particles, so here is a good example of a particle system being used in animation. The resulting system of particles is generated in real time and is thus continuously varied and to a set degree outside of the animator's control. In this way, the forms produced by particle systems have the appearance of contingency and retain a degree of independence from their makers. The animator dictates the design intent, but the form is generated or found through the system itself. So the random values that each parameter is governed by, given to each parameter, is governed by so-called stochastic processes. So here we get into a bit of probability theory. I hope it's understandable, but it's taken me a while to get my head around. But in probability theory, a stochastic process is a mathematical object that denotes a randomly determined system whose patterns can be analyzed statistically, but not predicted precisely. They are widely used to mathematically model systems and phenomena that appear to vary in a random manner and find applications within a large number of disciplines, including sciences such as biology, chemistry, ecology, epidemiology, neuroscience, and physics, as well as technology and engineering fields such as image processing, signal processing, information theory, computer science, cryptography, and telecommunications. So maybe like a very relevant and good example right now would be how we are modeling the transmission of COVID-19, or also how we perhaps are modeling possible mutations of the virus itself. And we also see that actually with the flu vaccine. So the flu virus mutates at such a rate that we require a new vaccine for it every flu season. But in order to produce the flu vaccine in time for the flu season, scientists or epidemiologists have to kind of model the potential or possible mutation of the virus, and in order to predict how the virus will appear by the next flu season, in order to then create the vaccine based on this kind of prediction. So that prediction varies each year, and the flu vaccine is kind of varied in how well it works, essentially based on that model of the potential flu. So it's essentially a speculative image of the virus. So stochastic processes are also extensively used within finance. For example, the Black-Scholes model, which was published in 1973 and provided the mathematical legitimacy for the derivatives market, is governed by a partial differential equation. This is quite a funny image that I have up. I don't know why it's going to just stay on Star Trek while I'm talking about derivatives, but what was next? Okay, we'll get there. Oh, I could have shown that actually, sorry. So this is actually the maths behind the snow that you see in Frozen. So by adjusting the parameters in here, you can kind of create different qualities of snow, whether you want the snow to be more sticky or more solid or more crumbly. And so, yeah, this is a much more complex and a similar sort of form of particle system. Anyway, that should have come up earlier, but to return to the derivatives market. So the Black-Scholes model is, the Black-Scholes formula models the potential outcome of an options contract through certain parameters such as expected volatility, the type of option, the underlying stock price, the time to expiration, the strike price, and the risk-free interest. So through these parameters, it determines a theoretical value of the contract, thus legitimizing the trading of options. So these technologies, whether it's something like the Black-Scholes model or the way in which we model the mutations of a virus, frame the world today through a sort of speculative aesthetics. And if we compare those to the kind of technologies that emerged at the end of the 19th century, so the photograph or the phonograph, these are technologies of mechanical reproduction that aim to kind of capture the world and strive towards an integral realism, a kind of recreation of the world or a mirroring of the world. The technologies that were developed at the end of the 20th century, so these new technologies, instead they aim to model the world to come, so they're kind of speculative and future-facing. So the question that I really want to ask today is, how do these new technologies affect our understanding of the world and our role in shaping it? To answer the question, I will return our focus to architecture and the built environment. The same principles behind CGI particle systems are now finding application in design practice, so in architecture, in urbanism, in fashion design, product design, all manners of design, where they are utilized as a method of form finding. Such systems follow a parametric design method. Parametric design is an algorithmic system-based methodology in which the adjustment of certain parameters or variables results in the manipulation of the system's outcome. Once a designer has related the system's parts together, they can defer to the system the task of keeping them related. In this way, designers can use such systems for finding different forms that respond to their design parameters. The system adapts with each adjustment to the parameter and computes new forms in response. The parameters can be adjusted by specific inputs or stochastically defined, as in the case of particle systems. Together, the parameters define, encode, and clarify the relationship between design intent and design response, devolving a degree of the design task to the response of the form or system itself. In this way, the parametric system can be used as a form-finding technique. So the technologies of computing with their system-based logic have offered new ways of working with parametric design processes. And we see this in examples such as Frank Gehry, who was one of the first architects to adopt computer-aided parametric design tools. So Gehry here used a aerospace software program called CATIA to calculate the complex Bezier curves used in the design and construction of his pavilion for the Barcelona Olympics in 1992. And parametric design tools have since become widespread amongst architects working in the avant-garde. Greg Lynn is notable for his use of parametrics to calculate metaballs, which are a mathematical object, leading to what has been dubbed blobitecture, or Queen of the Curve. Zaha Hadid is also noteworthy, as are a number of architects who have been invariably described as deconstructivist, minimalist, or engaging in architecture of the fold, the blob, or the envelope. However, it's perhaps easier to explain the methodology using an example from analog predecessors. So here we see, so this is, well, it's two images, but one has been, one is the model and then one is this kind of funicular system. So this is a method developed by Gaudi in order to calculate the curvature of archways, essentially. So through the suspension of weighted ropes, he could derive the shape of catenary curves of complex vaulted ceilings and arches So by inverting the hung model, he could derive arches that he could be sure would stand in pure compression. The system would automatically calculate structurally sound shapes with each adjustment to the parameters. Within this funicular system, gravity, or Newton's law of motion, is the explicit function that derives the outcome, basically the vertex of the ropes, which in turn are informed by a number of adjustable parameters, namely the length of the various ropes, the positions of the anchors on the ropes, and then the kind of relative weight of those anchors. So if you imagine, if you were to remove one of the weights, then that curve would sort of disappear, the other curves would lengthen, and the whole system is a sort of self-contained system that would adjust to any small adjustment that you make and kind of instantaneously calculate the rest of the form. So such a system can be described as autopoietic, a self-contained system that is capable of both maintaining and reproducing itself. Just like particle systems, this shifts the role of the designer. The designer does not shape the form, but having set the parameters, devolves the task to the system itself. If we are to understand the discipline of design as a system for organizing the real, autopoiesis can be understood as a design system in which the task of finding the most effective formal order is left to the system itself. This parametric workflow is contra to the logic of the master plan that has dominated modernist design discourse. The ideals that inform modernist design extend to the organization of society and are expressed economically, so through like Fordist planned economy, or on the other side of the Iron Curtain, the kind of Soviet 5-year economic plans, and also spatially through large-scale hierarchical urban planning. So you see that in the sort of like the Haussmannization of Paris is the kind of beginning of this large-scale urban planning. Autopoietic design abolishes the master plan, devolving to the system itself the task of computing its most effective form. And this is really my sort of central argument, namely that a similar logic forms the basis of the neoliberal ideology, at the heart of which is the notion that individuals can only ever understand a narrow portion of the complexities of the world, that they are unable to effectively plan or shape society, and that consequently, the economic market is a better tool for calculating, processing, and ordering society than the mechanisms of state planning. Such truth games have dissipated beyond economic policy into disciplines as varied as the management of natural resources and carbon emissions, the shaping of education and healthcare systems. So essentially, whenever you hear of the marketization of something, that is essentially what is happening. It's applying market ideas to other forms of systems in order to kind of control them through a similar parametric or autopoietic system. In each instance, the autopoietic market is utilized as a design solution, one in which form is liberated to find itself through the spontaneous order of unregulated laissez-faire policies. Under such an ideology, the market can be modeled, mapped, and analyzed, but in order to operate efficiently, must remain free from regulation and planning. These ideas are evident in the literature that has emerged from the Mont Pelerin Society, that's the economic policy think tank established in 1947 in advocacy of classical liberalism. So it's a think tank that still operates today, but essentially most of the sort of major neoliberal thinkers have come from there. For example, Friedrich Hayek, who was the first president of the Mont Pelerin Society, argued that individual liberty can only be exercised in a society that is not ordered by central direction, but by, quote, the spontaneous formulation of a polycentric order, end quote. So Hayek was influenced by the classical liberal thinkers of the Scottish Enlightenment. So people like Adam Ferguson and Adam Smith, who coined the idea of the invisible hand of the market. But he was also Hayek was also influenced by the emerging fields of cybernetics and systems theory. We see this influence in figures such as Michael Polanyi, who was another founding member of the society. Polanyi was a polymath and had a background in the science of physical chemistry. So physical chemistry is a branch of chemistry that models the behavior of chemicals at a particle level. And it's essentially the same field of science that forms the mathematics behind particle systems. The influence of figures like Polanyi on neoliberal thinking is evident. For example, in The Constitution of Liberty from 1960, Hayek compares the process of crystal formation to that of the market. He writes, quote, "We could never produce a crystal or a complex organic compound if we had to place each molecule or atom in the appropriate place in relation to the others." End quote. Hayek goes on to argue that, likewise, lawmakers cannot set up a particular order to society. They must merely, quote, "create conditions in which an orderly arrangement can establish and ever renew itself," end quote. I mean, that very much just sounds like the same sort of method of a kind of process that forms itself that we have in parametric design. Such ideas naturalize the market, comparing market forces to fundamental laws of physics. It is also important to note that such notions of nature are at best naive. The idea that natural systems tend towards equilibrium is reductionist and inaccurate. The market itself is not self-regulating. We see this in the continual cycles of boom and bust. Market forces move capital in one direction, up, accumulating wealth in the capitalist classes. Such a system will only further enclose the remaining commons. It is extractivist and it is destroying the environment, and it's by no means self-regulating. Parametric design reflects the technoaesthetics of the neoliberal ideology. Both share their roots in systems theory and cybernetics. Both create a phantasmagorical illusion of a post-ideological, apolitical neutrality emerging from the elegance of natural systems that obfuscates the material relation behind their production. Such truth games further entrench what Mark Fisher calls capitalist realism, the idea that there is no alternative to capitalism. So whilst it's beyond the remit of this talk, a logical next step for this research strand would be to investigate the application of speculative aesthetics and autopoietic design outside the logic of capital. Before the Q&A, I will conclude with some questions of my own. Is it possible to harness these speculative tools in order to shape a world derived from more equitable parameters that redistribute wealth and power across the commons rather than into the hands of the capitalist classes? Can we utilize the speculative aesthetics of modeling and simulation in order to better comprehend the abstractions of capital? And can these aesthetic forms aid in the political project of dismantling capital's totality? Can these techniques provide the tools for a development of Frederick Jameson's cognitive mapping? Or should we instead heed the words of Audre Lorde that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Wilf. It's being like very detailed and rather pessimistic intro into capitalist reality through computerized particles. And I invite everyone to write, who in Zoom here, to use the chat option to write your questions if there are any questions to Wilf. And those who are watching us on YouTube, you can also write in the chat option, and we will moderate the questions. And maybe I'll kind of like, just to start to warm up the discussion, I would like to kind of quote Marxian theorist and economist Alfred Sonritel, who is saying that the real abstraction arise is based on actions of individuals. So what is your take on the agency of the users of this active members of this capitalist reality and their actually participation in this in the constructing neoliberal conditions?
I think that what we see in terms of what I try to touch on here as well is that the sort of system under which we're living, or most of us are living, i.e. neoliberalism, has sort of become entrenched as a system that is so like naturalized itself, or created the illusion that it is natural, that I think that most of us participate, even if we don't want to, without necessarily being aware. And I also think that, I mean, it's somehow even rare now that you would meet someone that describes themselves explicitly as a capitalist or whatever. So I think like these systems have developed over a long time. And I think that what I'm also trying to demonstrate here is this kind of link between technology and how we understand the world aesthetically, or how technology interprets the world aesthetically, and how there's a kind of two-way reflection between how that reflects the ideology but also shapes the ideology. So you see how like cybernetic theories and stuff became so important in forming a kind of neoliberal ideology, and I don't think that it's necessary that one follows the other. I think that there is a kind of continual movement between the two. As for like your question, I think that like to try and think about individuals. I mean, I named some individuals here where I talk about Hayek, or I talk about Polanyi, or you could talk about Milton Friedman, or these other kind of economists and stuff. But I don't think that like the idea that capitalism can sort of be pinned on these sort of individuals is not really accurate. I think that as a system, it favors like it is born out of individualism, and individual interest, and a disregard for the welfare of others, the welfare of the environment of the world. And I think that actually that individualism, the system sort of follows from that logic. It's not necessarily that you have characters that, I mean, the Mont Pelerin Society are often kind of almost conspiratorially painted as this nefarious organization that are kind of pulling the strings, but I really don't want to get into kind of conspiratorial ideas of kind of the individual shaping. I think that ideas shape these systems, and some of those ideas emerge from certain individuals or are expounded by certain individuals, but I think that the responsibility for the growth of capitalism is something that's much more deeply embedded systematically than through your kind of individual kind of interest, although it's based on an individual interest.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you know, when we talk about the software abstraction, right? When the architecture of computer engineering is very much based on actually illumination of this individual within the process, which is based on this divide and rule strategy when like every programmer is given like very particular small tasks, and in the end not even knowing maybe what is the final product will be, and then all these little tasks are coming into this kind of something architecture of a computer project, or I don't know, certain computer profile, which is actually generating or participating in generating this real abstraction, which is extra capital or extra labor or whatever, but in the end aim at generating capital. So yeah, so on one hand there is a individualism, but on the other hand, it's so difficult to pinpoint in neoliberal order of the world those accountable for the process.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say that someone that was working in that like working in a kind of system like that, like essentially what you're describing also massively predates kind of software development. It's a kind of Taylorism or Fordist abstracted labor in which no individual worker understands the larger process of what they're doing. But I don't think that the responsibility for like the system of capitalism can ever fall on those people that are kind of a cog in that system either. So I think that, yeah, maybe you're talking about a kind of more theoretical level of a building of the ideology, but maybe I misunderstand.
No, I think you understood it right, and I think all these examples of parametric architecture or like computerized building of architectural structure, or production of public space as well through those images, I think they are based on these principles of this kind of like on one hand collective, but on the other hand very alienated from each other individuals that are working towards constructing this this reality, which is becoming after that an extra a commodity.
Mm, yeah, no, definitely. I think, yeah, you see, yeah, I think that sort of that was one of the starting points for this research, was to kind of encompass within the idea of real estate not just the architecture, but the sort of mechanisms and of marketing, and whether that is also the kind of this actual virtual architecture as well, which is this sort of mirror or like dark mirror of the real thing, and then through that idea getting into kind of ideas of abstraction and simulation. And I touch a bit more on that in the first half of the thesis. I can also share, if anyone is interested, then I can share the full thesis as well. But
yeah, that's great. So questions? I don't see any questions. Masha, do you have any questions? We can't hear you.
I don't know what's wrong, because
Yeah, now it's fine.
So I was just thinking about these videos. I really liked how you used this idea of autopoiesis, and I was also wondering how these very videos could be also connected to idea of Niklas Luhmann, German sociologist, of autopoietic society, and how communication is this tool for autopoiesis in the society. And these videos, you know, it's not the first time we see them. They've been in the market for quite a while. So they kind of reproduce the same discourse, which is very far from reality. You know, and when we were, for instance, this main image for the online series, we also use the same strategy of how to kind of, put all these people that kind of represent all the archetypes in this kind of, architectural render. So here we have a young mother, and then we have teenagers, blah, blah, blah. We all know how these renders look, how different they are from the real architectural outcomes. So I was thinking about, I don't know, a specific hack of this algorithm, of this kind of prank of how this videos and this algorithm could be broken in order to kind of stop this reproduction of this, virtual reality, that also contributes very much to this image that is basically non-existent, but also I think creates a very big gap between the virtual reality and reality, between what we want and what we can have also. Because for many people, these dream homes are reality that can never happen. Guardian or some other newspaper just had an article earlier this week about cost of Dublin apartments. So if you're a couple or live together with one more person, you have to earn up to 100,000 euro per year to be able to afford a very modest apartment. So I was just wondering about maybe an additional role of this images and the videos, and how there can be, I don't know, an alternative way of presenting that. How can we kind of break this vicious circle in a way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe to put on my artist hat instead. I think that art, or all forms of art, can be also ways to kind of complicate and break these sorts of images, and also to sort of reveal some of the ugliness behind them. And actually, that's something that I have been working on myself, and actually prior to the more theoretical research that I presented today, I was working exactly with these images to kind of re-edit them and represent them, but I kind of reworked them into a new narrative in which, into a sort of post-apocalyptic narrative in which the world is flooded, and you see these kind of beautiful views out of these apartments of the sea, which obviously normally are coming from like Miami or Dubai or whatever. And I kind of reworked them and added this voiceover that kind of implies this kind of lone character that is stranded on one of these tower blocks in the middle of the flooded ocean. So I think that there's a potential for kind of writing new narratives that kind of try to break this kind of dream image. And I think that's like something that I'm really interested in as an artist that also works with existing material. How can I take what is a kind of quite toxic, purely kind of capitalist image, and through reworking it, reveal a lot of that ugliness and stuff. And that's sort of an ongoing project for me. So yeah, so that would be one answer. I guess also trying to analyze exactly these images from a more academic or theoretical side as well, which again is something I'm trying to engage in. So yeah, I think that there are tools for kind of complicating and attempting to break or reveal the kind of Janus face of capitalist realism. So I think that would be my answer.
And there is a related question to what you've just said, and maybe you can take it a bit further, from Robert Foster. Thanks for the great talk, Wilf. What are your plans to take this? What are your plans to take this research forward, and how do you imagine that it will be manifest itself in your practice? And also, there is a further text. How do you feel that the visualization of imagined architecture relates to the real-time modeling of digital twins of the actual built environment by town planners, etc.?
So maybe to answer the first question, I guess at the end of this talk, that was actually also a quote from the final paragraph of of the thesis, and I posed a few questions there in terms of further research. So essentially, I think that there's definitely some research to be done in terms of, I mean, there is a kind of leftist accelerationist kind of practice or theoretical practice around kind of repurposing these tools towards a kind of more leftist ideas. So I guess there's already some research there, which I haven't gone into too much. But that's a possible further place for research. And yeah, also just in terms of whether there are kind of more any kind of ways in which these sorts of tools can be, like I say, used to kind of redistribute wealth in a more equitable kind of way. So I guess, yeah, that's something I'd like to research further. In terms of my practice, I guess I have also been toying with the idea of because there is a lot of I use some video extracts here and stuff, but I'm also think that there's potential for distilling the thesis into more of a video essay, which I'm thinking of working on in the next year. And then your second question I have here. Yeah, so I guess there is this kind of definitely this mirroring of the visualization and then the kind of real-time construction. I mean, mostly what you see is the kind of disappointing results of this kind of imagined speculative images. But I think that there is this weird play between the visualizations and then the actualizations in terms of, I think that you start to see a lot of, I would argue that there's a lot of architecture made nowadays that is almost made to look good in a kind, if you think architecture comes from the tools and technologies that are available to architects. And so if you're working on a kind of paper plan that's very 2D on a desk, and then it's going to lead to a certain type of architecture. And you already see this with kind of the parametric tools that you see this kind of architecture that is like these amorphous blobs and things like this. So I think that there is definitely a real relation between the technologies that are used to visualize, but also to kind of parametrically design and produce and calculate these kind of complex forms, and then the architecture that is built. So already, you definitely see this relationship between technology and the kind of resulting architecture. But I also think that a lot of there's something that I've noticed in some of the promotional videos more recently of architecture, where they will be actual videos of the real architecture, but the way that they're shot and stuff, they almost are trying now to mimic the CGI. So it's almost like this kind of, it's eating itself in terms of you have this simulation of the kind of cinematic image, but then that image is almost become so perfect and good that the real estate developers don't even want to use the actual real footage of the thing. And so they're almost trying to emulate this perfect image that they create in the visualization. So it's very strange phenomena that is just circling in on itself?
Because I think like when it's just started, maybe like mid 2000, like beginning of 2000, maybe 2010, like all this kind of very imaginary, very dreamy prospects of real estate. I think at that time people won't be. They were camouflaged. They weren't there were like some silhouettes and not like real avatars or not real. Like people. So I actually like while speaking of that, like when I was preparing for this talk, I remembered an example I was using in my actually master thesis for the diet, the work of Hitter Steil, How Not to Be Seen. And if you don't mind, it would be just interesting to maybe remember of that. I want to share my screen just literally for 1 minute to see this again as a reminder of that, actually the space or the space around properties, which is depicted on the on those prospects of real estate. They might not even have an idea what kind of people going to live there, but they're already calculated and also and monitored. So just a second. Okay, now I don't know how to demonstrate my screen.
Should just be at the bottom, share screen, but
Yeah. It's just a part of the work.
There are 13 ways of becoming invisible by disappearing. Living in a gated community. Living in a military zone. Being in an airport, factory or museum. Owning an anti-paparazzi handbag. Being fitted with an invisibility cloak. Being a superhero. Being female and over 50. Surfing the dark web. Being a dead pixel. Being a Wi-Fi signal moving through human bodies. Being undocumented or poor. Being spam caught by a filter. Being a disappeared person as an enemy of the state. Eliminated. Liquidated. And then dissimulated.
Yeah, that's I thought like maybe it's good to use like some extra references from a different point because I found it kind of relative and yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's also related to the talk we had previously, and I encourage everyone who is here now with us to actually have a look at the previous video in the series of our discussions. And then there is a very vivid example of excluded communities from the urban landscape when it comes to city development and constructions, and how actually like how those marginal groups that are actually forming outdoor landscape of many cities, are how they are kind of extracted, how they kind of taken away from that in order to develop the city. And there is one more question we have. Masha, do you want to read it?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so that's from Francesca Hacker. I want to ask about how these examples jump in between virtual and physical manifestation during the design processes makes a difference. For instance, in Gaudi example, he worked on the physical model, then presumably made design from that, then produced the building itself. Whether in other cases there are different orderings and start and points. Are these varying routes through the digital and the real significant, and what slips through the gaps or gets lost in these multiple buildings?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's actually, I mean, quite often, basically, what happens with these buildings is that they look great on the computer, and then they send these designs to the construction workers, and they just cannot build them as well, which is also this kind of like the limitations of materials and stuff. But I think that's developed a lot more. And actually, when you look at someone like Frank Gehry, for example, the reason actually that he started to use this software isn't so much like he could maybe make that with a physical model, but actually by using this kind of software, it does create an interface between the stages of design and production. So actually the construction workers really rely on this software as well. And in fact, Gehry then made a lot of money basically developing a new form of software out of this that's based on this CATIA software that is specifically for that gap between the architect and the construction worker. So these tools are also, like, a lot of it did come out of exactly interpreting these kind of theoretical or speculative virtual images into kind of physical images, or buildings, I should say. So that's maybe some answer to your question, but I guess, yeah, like jumping between virtual and physical during so yeah, then with someone like Gaudi, that model that he would have made with the ropes, it serves it serves quite a specific function, in that it doesn't represent necessarily what the architecture will look like, but it is essentially a system that is used as a form of calculating or computing these curves, and because essentially it's based on a really simple idea that anything that hangs is then, like, if you invert it, it's very solidly structural. So that sort of that model is used for quite a specific process in the making, and then you see the kind of other physical model that he must have made after that kind of embellishes on that structural model. Yeah, I mean, I guess now as well, like, physical models are becoming less and less important in kind of the design process. They have gained a big importance in, like, the visualization process. So in terms of selling a building, like, you go to any showroom of a new tower block, or if you go to like a real estate fair, there will be all of these, like, very shiny models of the buildings, but those aren't models that are built by the architects in order to kind of work out what this building is going to look like. These are models that are made kind of once all the plans are complete, that are used just to represent the buildings. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but feel free to jump in if it doesn't. And then maybe in the meantime, I will go to Risa's question. Shall I read it out loud for the people on YouTube? So Risa asks, Wilf, I think that a few minutes ago you spoke to the question that I was sitting with about how a knowledge of the system and its nuances, namely this complex set of relationships around autopoiesis, creates opportunities for centralizing the discourse you're bringing forward into a broader public discourse. What comes to mind is that way that glitches in a system can become windows for supervision and have equally eye-catching visuals, but to a very different end. Yeah, that's a nice question or thought. I think I've also, maybe Marisa maybe knows this, but I wrote something else recently about glitches and kind of what they reveal in terms of like the construction of images, and that maybe also is another answer to Maria's question around like what can be done to kind of resist these. And I think that essentially introducing glitches or hacks or whatever are a kind of interesting way of bringing out, because these, I think virtual or digital images are often thought of as very immaterial, but they have they are very tactile, and a glitch really like brings out a lot of the like kind of tactile or almost material qualities of digital images, and sort of reveals the kind of blankness of them really, or like the depthlessness of them. Yes. Samantha says bye. Kat says hello.
I think we are close to wrapping up, and because we usually try to keep the conversation within like 1 hour or a little bit longer. And I just wanted to say that the series of online discussions and many other projects by Talk is very much about human rights, right? Like violation of rights within this situation that might not seems unusual, or basically we try to make seen the very unseen properties and make ourselves politically literate and be able to recognize those processes that are inevitably leads to violation of some sort of rights. And I guess like housing is one of the sort of entrance, understandable for many individuals, topic that we try to look at from very many different perspectives. And Wilf, thank you so very much. You made us a little bit more aware, and we've learned many extra nuances which you researched on about not just housing, but the organization of the world.
Yeah.
Thank you very much who came, and everyone who asked questions. And this video will be, after some editing, it will be available online, unless you want to come back to some references which Wilf mentioned during his talk.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and we want to use it.
I just want to also say something. I think it's not only about just to continue what you, Anna, were saying, not only about like having rights, but also about creating new rights. And I think this is something very important, because we are so used to certain images and ideas and concepts, and we take them so much for granted. So I think this closer look that we're trying to take at different social phenomena as a part of this series is a great way to kind of learn into this things that we consider given, and kind of change our attitude towards them and think of how they can be changed, and how we can also, because our rights are shrinking all the time. I think we all feel this pressure. So how can we resist this process that's been very global recently? So I think with this series, we're all trying to look into new ways for us as citizens, also into, creating and standing for our rights, for our thoughts, and for our actions. I think that's also important. And having said that, I also wanted to announce our Our next conversation that is also going to be very important, touch upon very important issues, because we're going to be talking about debt and mortgage, something that I think very closely related to dream houses and these dreams about housing and homes and shelter. And we're going to move back to Russian context again, and we're going to be talking about life and debt and how a mortgage and credit system has become this tool for the Russian government to kind of reproduce and strengthen its power, and how it can, becoming a tool for creating dependency of citizens on the government and bigger political and social structures. And our speaker will be Grigory Yudin, a Russian sociologist. Unfortunately, will be in Russian, but for those who understand and can learn it for this next 2 weeks, we're inviting you guys to join. We're meeting at the same time, 5 p.m. Central European time in 2 weeks, February 11th. So look forward to seeing you there. And Wilf, thanks again very much. I think we all learned lots of new things. It was very, very interesting and educational. And I look forward to seeing these hacks that you are thinking of in your new art projects. So thank you everyone very much. It's been delightful, and see you around.